こんにちは。チーターデジタルの加藤です。チーターデジタルが運営するマーケターのコミュニティゼロトゥロイヤルより、マーケティング戦略の大転換をテーマに、ウェブセミナーをお届けします。今回のトピックは、アメリカのマーケターは今どのようにこの危機を乗り越えているのかについて、チーターデジタルのグローバルCMO、リチャード・ジョーンズをゲストに2回に分けてお話していきたいと思います。パート1では、消費者の行動変化と消費財業界の取り組みについてご紹介します。パート2では、スポーツ業界と外食業界の事例を紹介し、最後にマーケターが今何をすべきかについて考察していきます。セッションに入る前に簡単なアンケートにご協力ください。QR コードを読み込んで、皆さんの現在のマーケティング課題を教えてください。Okay, Richard. Thanks for joining us. We are so glad to have you here.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
So please tell us what you have seen in the United States. What are the changes and what kind of success are there?
So let's just take a brief moment just to think about the impact on marketing. There was some e-consultancy research that was collected in the latter stages of March, which basically surveyed marketing professionals. And basically, only 13% of those survey respondents actually said that the marketing campaigns were going ahead as planned. So basically means the vast majority of marketers were having to change, cancel, or amend their marketing campaigns because of the start of COVID-19 taking a significant grip on certain economies. Now, the bit that's interesting is that this period of disruption is actually showing marketers new ways that they might work after the pandemic is actually over. So almost 2/3 of people that were in the survey actually said they were discovering new marketing processes that they might like to carry on. So we're in a period of innovation. Now, just to look on the kind of evolution of consumer attitudes, because I think this is very important. Cheetah Digital actually commissioned research with e-consultancy that was done across 6 different markets around the world. And that all happened in February and March and was recently published. And there were some key themes that were shown in that research. There is clear evolution of consumer attitudes that were happening before COVID-19. So COVID-19 didn't happen in a vacuum. There was already changing consumer attitudes. And the most compelling of those changing consumer attitudes was people's attitude to privacy. And what we saw in the research that actually almost between 1/3 and above of consumers don't actually like personalized ads that are driven off cookie data. So this is essentially where a consumer is getting a heavily personalized ad but doesn't remember ever telling that brand the information with which they're using to personalize that ad. So it's creepy. That's what consumers in this research were telling us, that the majority of personalized ads were creepy. And actually consumers have taken massive amounts of privacy steps in response to changing attitudes around privacy. So 70% of US consumers do not trust social media platforms with their data. In Japan, that was 66% of consumers don't trust social media platforms with their data. And actually, because of privacy, in the US, 37% of consumers regularly delete their cookies, about 26% in Japan. And actually, about 30% of US consumers have actually installed an ad blocker, and that's on the rise, about 17% in Japan. So consumers very clear on attitudes towards privacy right in the lead up to the lockdowns of COVID-19 in many markets. Conversely, the report said that actually consumers will share data direct to a brand in return for value. So 43% of consumers in Japan are happy to share direct data directly to a brand in return for a value exchange. And it was even higher in markets like the US and Europe. In fact, what we're actually seeing is that the type of content, the type of data that consumers will share is actually true marketing gold. They will tell you about future purchase intent. They will tell you about feedback to your products and services. They will tell you about their motivations and their desires and their attitude. So in effect, what we're seeing is that consumers will share a lot of psychographic data, a lot of purchase intent data with brands. And we see that number growing in the various different surveys that we've done year over year. We also saw that actually when you, as a consumer, the number one channel with which consumers wanted to receive personalized offers in the US was email by far. 73% of consumers had actually made a purchase from an email offer versus only 31% from a social media ad. In Japan, it was 55% had made a purchase from an email and 31% from a social ad. So you can see there was a real discrepancy between the effectiveness of driving sales from email, which is the top channel, and actual social ads, which quite often is touted as the best channel with which to drive sales. And actually the data certainly didn't show that. And actually we saw the importance of email for receiving personalized offers. We also saw in the data that consumers will be loyal if they're encouraged. So we actually saw in many markets about a third of consumers say that they would have been loyal to a brand if the brand had actually asked them to and had a loyalty program with which there was a value exchange in return for repeat purchases. So we're seeing a lot of dollars being left on the table because marketers don't have a loyalty program to capitalize on these trends that we're seeing here. And actually in the US, loyalty participation is clearly on the rise, with almost 9 times as many consumers planning to participate in more loyalty programs in 2020 versus those that were planning to reduce their participation. And what's interesting is we think these two things are correlated. So consumers not wanting marketers to be creepy doesn't mean that consumers are not happy to share information directly to a marketer, to a brand, but it's in return for a value exchange. It's in return for something of value to the consumer. And loyalty programs are seen as one of the main ways that can define the value exchange between the consumer and the brand in return for data, in return for engagement, in return for repeat purchase, and in return for advocacy. So very, very interesting changing consumer attitudes as we have gone into lockdown.
We see such a big opportunities in the consumer packaged goods industries. So would you please tell us what is actually happening in CPG industry?
So firstly, in the CPG industry, lots and lots of customers, lots and lots of CPG brands have actually been responding with empathy to consumers and actually getting behind philanthropic endeavors, which I think is an important thing to demonstrate trust or to encourage trust between brand and consumer. And so this is one of many examples of our customers doing really good, interesting things. So the Kellogg's Family Rewards loyalty program, Kellogg's actually did a couple of different things. They actually made a donation of $5 million to Feeding America, which is the food banks charity that basically provides food to families that are in hardship and in need. And of course, with the amount of people that were laid off as we went into lockdown. So a lot more families that were reliant on support from food banks and other charitable donations. So they made a sizable donation, but then they also allowed consumers to donate their family rewards points in return for donations to Feeding America. And the last count I looked at, it's a recent campaign, they'd actually raised over $100,000 in the donations from family rewards consumers, participants, to donate their points to Feeding America. Now, of course, as well as the philanthropic campaigns that CPG industry has already done, there is a requirement as a brand to be able to drive engagement with your consumers. And what we've seen in the lockdown in the US and the European markets is that screen time has actually gone up. So people can't go outside, they can't go and do their favorite hobbies, etc. So they're consuming a lot more media, they're on their screen time, which is an opportunity to engage consumers on digital channels and actually do so that provides some value to the audience you're trying to engage. And this is just one of many different interactive experiences we're seeing the CPG industry do to take advantage of this audience, which is locked up at home in isolation. Now, this was Natural Light, one of the AB InBev brands, and actually the students have had all of their graduation ceremonies cancelled because of reasons for the lockdown. So they actually created an experience that was all pushed out and done through Facebook, which basically was a virtual commencement ceremony. So basically they signed up a whole set of famous business people and stars to be involved in this virtual commencement ceremony. And they actually invited the students to register to actually take part. And there was interactive experiences and competitions for them to actually have their name read out as part of this virtual commencement ceremony. So you've got, this is one example of a campaign designed to engage people in an interactive fashion whilst they're actually locked up during quarantine. And here's another example, which is actually blending interaction and engagement and philanthropic goals, which is the Bush, another AB InBev brand, which did a foster a dog campaign. Obviously, there's a lot of people that are ill, that have been in hospital, that are not able to look after their pets. There's also a lot of pets in dog homes, etc., where people may be ill. So it's easier to see if we can get those dogs out of the homes into foster homes where they can be cared for properly during this process. And so they did this foster a dog campaign, getting consumers to register for that. Big success, was very, very viral, and showed, I think, good empathy for the brand to a good cause. So another example of mixing those two things, philanthropic and engagement. Now, coming back to thinking about more, instead of the immediate response to the pandemic, because I think we're getting through that now in many of the markets, it's now more around, okay, what's the opportunity here? Long term, what's the economy going to look like as we move out of lockdown? And the interesting thing about the CPG industry is if you actually look at the data in the US, the online CPG buying has hit all-time highs in the latter stages of the response to the virus and the lockdown. People are at home. We have all of the main grocery chains that are not going to close because they're seen as essential infrastructure to keep the country going. And actually, there's been a really big spending spree on CPG products. An 8.5 billion increase during the 2 weeks ended March the 21st, 2020, as we went into lockdown. So a real opportunity, lots of revenue, but actually what does that mean for a brand and the CPG industry long term? And the interesting thing, we've already seen leading up to COVID-19 that brands were starting to embrace the opportunity to actually collect data on consumers. 20 years ago, CPG companies, or 10 years ago, CPG companies weren't that interested in knowing who their consumers were. They were quite happy to do TV advertising, mass media, and to get brand recall when consumers were walking into supermarkets to make purchases. Obviously, the move to online, which is happening across all industries, is changing the way brands are thinking about their relationship to the consumer, because they also have the fear of being disintermediated by retailers, and then retailers squeezing brands on margins and price. So we've seen the consumers are starting CPG brands are starting to build out their own marketing databases, starting to implement their own loyalty programs, starting to run experiences that capture data, and promotions are one way of doing that. Because at the end of the day, consumers are walking around with smartphones in their pockets. They can swipe, type, speak, and shoot. There's many different ways for marketers to engage directly with consumers and to collect actually data around them, their motivations, their desires, and interests. And actually, if you think about kind of privacy incidents and how they've affected consumer interactions with brands, that's been a big thing, no question. But it's been a big thing associated with the wrong way that marketers have been using consumer data. So if you snoop on consumers by dropping third-party tracking cookies where there isn't really explicit consent, you're dropping a cookie on them, you're checking where they go. If you are buying third-party data, which is quite often very badly sourced, and certainly consumers can't show you a trail of explicit consent for you to have captured their data and then sold it on through the marketing and advertising ecosystem. So there is a distrust of consumers, by consumers, of anyone that is using their data. What we've actually seen, though, is the rise of zero-party data, which is data that is captured directly because a marketer or a brand is asking a consumer for their data in return for a value exchange. So that's important. And actually, the opportunity for CPG companies is to actually cut through the disintermediation of the retailers and actually have a direct relationship with the consumer themselves. And that's really, really important. It's really important for a couple of reasons. We talked about if a brand has no real power over its own consumers, it can be squeezed by retailers on margins. That's one thing. The other side is we've seen retailers develop private label brands. The biggest example is how Amazon has all but decimated the battery industry here in the US, because Amazon have come out with Amazon's own private label batteries, much cheaper than anything that's offered by the main brands in the space. Oh, and guess what? Amazon has eaten a huge amount of that market share. And we've seen that not just with Amazon, we've seen all sorts of different retailers and supermarkets increasingly going private label and pushing their own brands in order to maximize their own margins. And that's a real big problem for CPG brands. Now, if they can build their own direct relationship with consumers, establish their own loyalty with consumers, they can actually start to tip the power balance between brand and retailer. And the way to do that is to actually turn the unknown consumer that you might have been doing mass media to into a known consumer in your marketing database with actually a program to drive long-term advocacy and loyalty from that consumer. The other side of it is that the CPG brands were already looking to experiment with many more direct-to-consumer business models where they cut out the retailers altogether. So things like subscription services. So a big example of that would be one of our customers, Dollar Shave Club here in the US, which sold all of its shaving equipment via subscription, shipped over the mail directly to consumers. And Gillette, which is another one of our customers, P&G, they actually have come out with their own subscription service to compete against Dollar Shave Club and Harry's. And that is a traditional CPG brand experimenting with direct-to-consumer business models. But if you don't know the consumer, you have no direct-to-consumer business model. So that's the opportunity. Let's come back to zero-party data, which I mentioned about as a moment. So this whole issue with privacy and personalization. Sometimes those can be two competing forces, privacy and personalization. But actually, zero-party data is a way that marketers can actually make privacy and personalization actually work in harmony, not against each other. So if you actually think about the various different consumer data types that marketers actually use, what we're seeing is third-party data, which is being bought, that is most at risk from privacy legislation and consumer attitudes, because there really isn't any explicit consent in third-party data. Consumers never really ever gave their consent for data to just be reused, repackaged, and resold across a gazillion different people in the advertising ecosystem. And I fully support all of the legislative changes, as well as just marketers. This is best practice, right? Don't use third-party data. What you want to do is move your strategy to first-party data and zero-party data. This is data that you're collecting directly from an individual. But what I like about zero-party data is it really focuses on self-reported data. Because if you think about first-party data, you can actually collect that on a variety of different ways, none of which are a bad thing, but they're not necessarily the consumer telling you explicitly themselves about their motivations and desires. You can collect first-party data by looking at what people are clicking on your website, what emails they're opening, how they're responding to you, what's the purchase data that's coming into your loyalty program, for example. These are all valid first-party data elements that you should collect and use to personalize your marketing. You're not using third-party data. You're not dropping third-party tracking cookies on people and snooping on them. You are collecting the data from their interactions across your digital platforms, and that's good. But actually, zero-party data is self-reported data. So that is when you are using things like questionnaires, like surveys, like quizzes, like questions on a coupon offer to allow a consumer to tell you directly as the marketer about their motivations, their desires, their purchase intents, and their interests. And so consumer data, self-reported data, zero-party data, and building the first-party database by collecting more opt-ins to have that direct relationship, or what we already saw consumers, CPG brands doing in the lead up to COVID-19. What's happened now with the industry is we've essentially accelerated digital transformation, not just in CPG industry, but all industries, because when you have a populace that is in quarantine, locked up at home, not going to the shops, etc., every business process is moved online. So you have this huge digital acceleration. And what we've seen is that CPG companies have this huge new amount of business that's being generated directly online. And the opportunity for them is to use this new engagement to actually turn more of the unknown consumers into known consumers and actually help their digital acceleration from beyond COVID-19. And actually, if you kind of look at what types of data that consumers are willing to share with brands, it's not just, email and marketing opt-in. They're willing to tell you all sorts of information about themselves. The majority of people will tell you about their product feedback, 38% in Japan, 42% info on products that they might buy in the future. 42% will tell you what products they're considering buying. In the US, this is marketing gold, and it's very close in Japan. 37% of people will tell you what they're planning to actually purchase in the future. It's absolute marketing gold. They'll also tell you about information on their past purchases, 41% in the US, 33% in Japan. They'll tell you a quarter of people in the US will tell you about the info on where and how and why they make purchases. 18% in Japan. I mean, this is astonishing level of detail that marketers can use. And all you have to do is ask and provide a value exchange in return for that data. And actually, when I talk about value exchange, what's the thing that's going to unlock consumers giving you their marketing opt-ins so they can be in your database, as well as telling you about themselves? Well, the research that we did from eConsultancy showed that there's a very broad set of things that people like to respond to. That is the trigger for them sharing data. Not surprisingly, almost a half of people said discounts and coupons in the US were a great way for them to be tempted to share data. It was like almost 40% of people in Japan, again, for discounts and coupons. Loyalty, again, really big theme. Loyalty points and rewards were, again, almost half of consumers in the US thought loyalty points and rewards were a great incentive for them to tell you about their interests, their desires, their motivations, etc. Things like early access or exclusive access to offers, chance to win things, unlocking content, were all other things that consumers, or a portion of consumers, would see as a good value exchange for them to share data about themselves and to give you their marketing opt-ins. So if you kind of step back and look at it and go, well, what does a CPG brand need to do to unlock that direct-to-consumer relationship? It really sits in these four buckets. That is, first job, get away from doing just pure mass media where you're pushing your brand message out, but you don't know who your consumers are. Take advantage of different media offerings that allow you to promote an experience which captures data and marketing opt-ins. So use your paid media budget to turn the unknown consumer into a known consumer in your database with your marketing opt-ins, right? The second part is start to build out your consumer profile. And you can do that two ways. You can do things like zero-party data campaigns, which actually give that value exchange for a consumer to tell you about themselves, to build your consumer profile. But you can also start to unify your data assets. So starting to pool all of the first-party data that you actually collect as consumers interact across all your various different platforms. So the POS systems, what they're doing on your website, the data from your loyalty programs, etc., etc. Lots of different ways to pool all of that first-party data to then look for opportunities to better communicate to your consumers, to give them offers that they're more likely to take up. And that's really looking at segmentation and analyzing the first and zero-party data you have around consumers in order to trigger more personalized communications across different channels so that you can turn that known customer into a retained customer because you're better personalizing your offers and your marketing to them. But ultimately, CPGs are really focused on actually that long-term loyalty. That's when they have true protection against the private label moves of retailers, of Amazon, etc. So that means getting people into things like the Kellogg's Family Rewards program, which is that loyalty programs which actually foster advocacy and encourage the increase in customer lifecycle value over the long term. So that's the process that CPGs need to go through in order to unlock that direct-to-consumer relationship.
Thanks, Richard. What surprised us is Japan's consumer behavior is very much similar to that of the rest of the world. How they are reacting to privacy and loyalty. That surprised us. ここまでのお話を簡単にまとめてみます。慈善団体への寄付を支援したり、中止になった卒業式を代わりに挙げるという取り組みですが、ポイントは今消費者が困っている世の中の関心事と関係しているのはもちろんのこと、自社ごとになっています。つまり唐突な活動ではなくて、ブランドがこれまで形成してきた DNA に根ざしているので、顧客の信頼を得られています。 次に、消費者の行動変化に見られるクッキー離れやプライバシーの意識への変化ですが、消費財業界はその変化を理解した上で、顧客と直接の関係を築こうとしています。特にマスメディアを通じて影響を与えてきた未知の顧客層、その顧客層を基地の顧客層にするために、自社の顧客データベースの拡充に資源配分することで、急激に成長するオンライン経由の購入需要に応えようとしています。いかがでしたでしょうか。引き続きパート2では、スポーツと外食業界のアメリカにおける取り組みについてご紹介していきます。